Well, welcome to the Get Fit with Jodelle podcast. I am, as usual, Jodelle, and today I am so thrilled to talk about something that affects myself as well. So I've been dealing with something that maybe many of you can relate to, and perhaps this will be a really informative podcast for you. So do you have mysterious health problems with no explanations? If so, you need this podcast. Mold can lurk without a trace or a scent. You don't have to smell it. It could be posing as many other diagnoses that you might be getting or an issue that you're having. And I feel like everyone in today's world, mostly being stuck inside and working inside, should listen to this life-saving podcast. And we'll find out why making sure you're addressing mold is life-saving too. We're going to find out how to spot mold sickness, how to get rid of it out of the body for good, as well as learn about the word emunctories. I don't think a lot of people know that word when it comes to the body, and biofilms and binders, and how mold even causes weight gain. I want to talk about that. When you're doing everything right, you can still gain weight and have no idea why. So I'm on the edge of my seat to interview my next guest because she's someone who has, in the past 4 years, battled mold toxic illness, as far as my understanding of the book went, and I'm chomping at the bit to ask my questions. So Dr. Jill Crista, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation. I'm really excited to chat with you.
So she's become my go-to girl for this whole mold protocol that I'm going through. And she's a naturopathic doctor. She's a best-selling author of one of my new favorite books on mold, Break the Mold: 5 Tools to Conquer Mold and Take Back Your Health. Which we'll be discussing, and an internationally recognized educator on mold illness. And she also provides online training for medical practitioners to help them become what's known as mold-literate, and to efficiently and effectively identify and treat their mold-sick patients. So yeah, this is so cool that you're doing this. You're educating people because you're passionate about this. So I really appreciate that about you.
Thanks. Yeah, mold has a way of finding you,
But you had quite a history of your own with a mold issue, which led you into seeing how many of your patients were actually suffering from mold. So how prevalent is mold toxicity in your opinion?
It's a lot more prevalent than I had thought. And actually, it's the other way around. I started with working with Lyme patients.
Oh, okay.
And I had this subset, and when you're doing functional medicine, naturopathic medicine, when you find and identify the cause and then treat the cause, people tend to get better. And there was this group of patients that we were doing all the right things. They were the minor percentage of my Lyme patients that weren't getting better. And it was like, what is going on with these people? And it turns out that it was mold for the majority of them. We discovered that after one of them they found black mold in his home. And it started my research dive, a couple decades ago into, whoa, what is this mold thing? What am I missing? And as you dig into the research, it is just incredible how many things mold can do to a body. And working with those chronically ill patients is what helped me kind of figure out my protocol. And then we had mold happen in our home. And that's when I was motivated to write the book, because I thought, wow, once the flood revealed itself, this is a hidden mold problem, as most of them are. And over 6 months, my family and I were getting sicker and sicker and sicker. It starts as things you can kind of explain away, things like, oh, I'm just more tired, I'm more stressed, I haven't been eating right, all this, I must be perimenopause, blah, blah, blah. And it becomes things that can't be ignored. I have enough tools. We were managing it, but not well, because we hadn't identified the cause. And when the flood revealed itself, and I was like, oh, this is mold. I know what to do about this. And then I felt really duty bound to share that knowledge, because it isn't rocket science. Most of it is things you can do on your own. While it is wonderful to have a mold literate doctor who's driving the boat, because then you don't have to figure all this stuff out for yourself. And they can find things that are going on with you that might not be mold and that you need more help with. But it is something that a lot of people can do on their own, using nutrition, using herbs, and using a certain order of treatment so that you don't make yourself sicker while you're trying to get better. So yeah, that's when I wrote the book.
Awesome. Yeah, I have it right here. It's a wonderful read. And what I love about it is it's an easy, you really break it down to be not so out of layman's terms. Like, it's really understandable for no matter what the population is that's reading it. And it's something that's doable. There's a lot of steps you can immediately go do. But let's break down a little bit of that and talk about, like, the most important thing you mentioned in there is what?
Avoidance.
Yes.
Yes. Nice lead up there. That was
Yeah.
good. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it is so true. I mean, you can't get well in the environment you got sick in. So talk about that a little bit.
Yes, my environmental medicine instructor, Dr. Walter Crinian, he nailed this into our minds that and he is a very funny person if you ever had a chance to know him.
Mhm.
So he says the first three steps of any toxicity illness is number one, avoidance.
Mhm.
Number two, avoidance.
Avoidance.
Number three, avoidance. So it was just really, okay, we got it. We got it now that, and there's a lot of with mold, there's a lot of dancing around that part. There's a lot of negotiating that people want to do with me that say, but do we really have to leave or do we really have to remediate?
Mhm.
Can we just cover it with plastic? Can we just paint over it? All of these questions. And it is now that I've become the mold lady and I'm getting all these cases where I'm consulting with doctors when they just can't figure out what's going on. And these are really talented doctors. They're doing all the right things. So much of the time, it's because their patients have convinced them the mold is no longer a problem. And once we identify that, I think they're still being exposed to mold, let's figure out where this is and get rid of it. Boom, then things change on a
Mhm.
dime because they were doing all the right things except avoidance. So, yeah, that's the biggest one.
Yeah, and it's so key because there's so many people will try to do the nutrition, they'll try to do the supplements and they won't get any results. And you have to get out of it no matter how much you're vested in the building or it's your home that you've built and you love or it's a
Mm-hmm.
space that you work in and you love your job. I get it. I've been there, but like at the same time you won't get well. So it's just like you're spinning your wheels. So we're going to go into some of the first little bits of treatment here too, but what I liked about your book is that it starts out with a simple symptom questionnaire that really gets you thinking and makes it easy to understand if someone could be mold toxic and not know. Because many people watching this might be like, well, what are the symptoms? What should I look for? And mold is so vast, as you know, in its
Yes.
symptoms that's really hard to pinpoint. But there are some like key ones that people can be aware of. So, what are some of the major symptoms, and what are some of the minor, maybe less obvious symptoms of mold toxicity?
Yeah, so the major ones, what makes it really confusing is you could have these symptoms from anything, from food sensitivities or from mercury toxicity from your teeth or, you name it, stealth infection. So it doesn't necessarily, they're not diagnostic, but they're common. And the first one would be fatigue. That's common in all people exposed to mold.
Mhm.
Depending on what level of energy you came into that environment with, that might look like if you're a really competitive athlete, that might look like your VO2 max is reduced and nobody can figure out why. And you're having a harder time, getting your recovery and that kind of thing. But for most people, the average standard American who's, a little bit sedentary and a little bit SAD diet, SAD diet, standard American diet, that's going to look like brain fog, fatigue, not getting yourself up to exercise, not getting outside, just sort of a slowdown.
Mhm.
Brain fog is another one, very, very big. And gut disruption. We see that with a lot of people exposed to mold because it does change the flora of your body. So you can see flora changes in the gut. You can see flora changes in the sinuses and respiratory passages, which that can look like for the gut, can look like a irritable bowel kind of picture. A lot of people get constipated, but some people get diarrhea. So it's that one of my patients describes it as constaria. It's like like you're constipated, and the body says, okay, let's get rid of this. And then you have diarrhea. So it can look like that. In the sinuses, that can look like chronic sinusitis, postnasal drip. Some people will have sleep apnea, non-obstructive sleep apnea, just from the exposure to the mold, because the
Mhm.
body is saying, we don't want to breathe this anymore. This is a toxin, so let's underbreathe. And so they're in their moldy environment, their brain is training them to be an underbreather. We
Mhm.
can see skin changes. So whatever your tendency is, if you tend toward more aging and you have drier skin, you're going to have more age spots and more wrinkling. If your tendency is to more inflamed skin, your little bit of acne can turn into cystic acne. Your little bit of rosacea can just go on fire, or psoriasis, or those kind of things. So skin, gut, a lot of the rapidly dividing tissues is where we're going to see it, and brain fog. But some of
Yeah.
the oddities are tinnitus or ear ringing.
Yeah.
And that is really common with mold. And there aren't very many things that cause it. And mold is one of the things on the list. And it makes sense if we look at the drug classes that are like the high, going to cause tinnitus risk factor drugs. A lot of them are antibiotics. Well, antibiotics are actually mold toxin. If you think of penicillin, the antibiotic penicillin, that's from Penicillium species mold. And we use that mycotoxin as an antibiotic because it's so effective at killing other living things. So yeah, it kind of stands to reason then that tinnitus would be one of the things that we would see. Another oddity is bladder irritation. A lot of people that have been diagnosed with interstitial cystitis actually have mold toxicity. And it's because those mycotoxins, and we can talk about what a mycotoxin is, but they will bump into the bladder wall and cause ulceration. So you get the actual look of the interstitial cystitis, but your cause is mycotoxin exposure from the mold. And then last would be pelvic pain. That's another one I see really commonly with mold. That again, there aren't a lot of other things that are causing that. Probably Lyme disease is high on that list, but mold is very, very high on the list of causes.
So I'm so glad you brought up several of those because I'll share a few that were my own. But when you say pelvic pain, what about vulvodynia? Would that be one that's really related to mold as well? Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Thankfully, I didn't have that, but I did have my biggest symptoms were the overactive bladder. I was having to get up every night or every hour to pee, like every hour of the night. Like, so it's 6-7 times a night. And I was like, what is wrong with me? And then also my eyes were the first to tell the story. Like they immediately got red and puffy and I'd never had that before. And I kept waking up day after day and they were getting worse and worse and worse. And I looked like I had aged about 10 years in a matter of 2.5 months. So like,
isn't it something? Mold ages
eyes are really
so
affected
quickly.
too. Yeah. So
yeah. And I should have said visual.
Yeah.
Dr. Shoemaker, I'm not a Shoemaker trained doc, but he's been in the mold biz a long time and he's really taken a lot of heat for bringing this to the conventional medical system. And he was one of the first to identify that there are a lot of visual symptom changes or visual symptoms. And he actually has a visual test if somebody wanted to test themselves and see. It's an online test that you can do through his website, Surviving Mold. And it's something that I'll use in practice when I want to know how deep into the neurological system is the mold going or has it made it. You can have a normal test and still be exposed to mold and being sick from mold, but it is one of those that we can use as a tracker for neurological deficit. But yeah, it changes not only the eyes themselves, just physically changing the eyes, but it changes your brain's processing of your vision. So it's like a double whammy.
Wow.
Did you have visual changes?
And actually during that time I was working on changing my diopter. So I was like adjusting my contact lenses to go less and less and less. So I was trying to help my vision, which it was working. But in the process, I kind of stalled out as soon as this new mold came into fruition. So I kind of stalled out on dropping because a lot of people aren't aware that you actually can affect your vision and get it better if you have myopia or nearsightedness. And so that's what I was working on. But yeah, it definitely stalled out. But I had good days and bad days. I had days where my vision was a little blurry, and then I'd have days where, and I still have that. I still have days where I'm just like, I think I'm releasing some mycotoxins, which we're going to talk about. And then other days where I'm like not releasing as many, so maybe my vision is better. So let's go into mold farts and mycotoxins, if you will.
Yeah, mold farts. So the way that I describe it in the book is that happily living mold has bad gas. It's going to be emitting gas like humans do. And these are chemicals. These are alcohols, aldehydes. I mean, we drink mold farts for for fun as alcohol. So alcohols, aldehydes, VOCs, which a lot of people get very chemically sensitive to VOCs that have been exposed to mold because those pathways in the liver are now totally overburdened. And they can't process what they're breathing in the air. And they can't process like new paint or going into a big box store, those sort of things. And then there are a few acids that happily living mold will secrete. And one of them is mycophenolic acid. It's on a urine mycotoxin test, you can see that some labs will test this and it's listed MPA. And this is a highly, highly immune poisoning chemical that we actually use in medicine to help patients not reject their new organs. So it's an organ rejection drug. We also use some of these things in oncology for cancer treatment as chemo. And that's just, if you start to think about it, wow, why would we want to breathe that in our air,
Yeah.
And I get the question a lot. People say, wait, if I'm breathing it, how is it affecting me? And so I think it's important for people to understand that if you are breathing anything in, these mycotoxins can go, and these chemicals as well, can go deep into the lung tissue, and they can go right in the bloodstream. So we don't have a block to it because they're ultra, ultra small. So mold farts are bad news, but the mycotoxins, this is where it gets really, really poisonous. And these are made by molds, not all the time, but when they feel like they've got a really, really good spot, which means there's enough humidity and there's enough food, carbohydrates, and previously living organic material that's now dead. That's their favorite. So if you think of our houses, what do we build it with? Previously living organic materials, We have wood that's been cut. We have paper on our drywall. We have, flooring, all this kind of stuff. And then dust. It loves that. So if a mold has that, it's going to start feeling greedy, and it starts to want to gas bomb out all the other molds in the environment, or any other thing that wants to live in its environment. Bacteria try and get in the game. There's lots of different things. It's like, ooh, there's humidity and food here, and it's kept at a nice consistent temperature. It's all the things that we like.
Sure.
So then it will try to bomb out that other thing, and that releases this gas into the air that it can go right through building material, and we breathe in our air.
Yeah, you don't have to see it. You don't have to smell it. It can be living right next to you, and you might not have any idea, but maybe you just had that little drip going in the bathroom next to you for a while. And
so I was terrified everybody listening.
Yeah, I know. But that's the thing, is like it needs to be told, because it's slowly killing you. And that's one thing I had to come to understand, was that mold was an undertaker, and it's slowly composting you. And when I learned that, and I think you had a part in your book about that really like hit me. And I was just like, oh my gosh, it's, like Lyme, like you said, that it kind of keeps people alive. It needs a host, but mold can slowly degrade and kill you.
And it would prefer if you would just keel over. It prefers if you're sedentary. So there's a reason why people can't tolerate exercise anymore. Mold has that figured out. Like, wait, don't go anywhere. We want to compost you. Yeah, I love that you said undertaker. That's kind of creepy. that makes it sound so much
creepy. Yeah.
I mean, it matches the menacingness of this creature that we're battling against.
Yeah, well, and I'm glad that you mentioned the exercise, because there's some symptoms that go along with what the mold does to you once it's in you, to get you to not live a normal life, like even keeping you up at night and not letting you want to go in sunlight. Talk about that.
Yeah, so mold is brilliant. It will actually block our vitamin D receptors in our body. So if you're being exposed to mold and mold toxins, so let's say there's a problem, like in our house. The reason why we didn't know it was mold is that it didn't smell at all. The mycotoxins were getting through building material and making us sick, but mycotoxins don't have an odor.
Right.
It's the other stuff. People are like, wait a minute, I know I've smelled mold. Yeah, you have, if it's been exposed to air. But if all of those spores are trapped behind building material, which was the case in our home, the only thing that was getting through that building material was these ultra small mycotoxins making us sick. So let's say that's the story. And then I know it's a horrible idea. And then let's say you aren't getting outside as much and you're getting those vitamin D receptors blocked. What happens is that even what you are taking as a supplement, so if your vitamin D levels are low, even if you're taking a normal dose for a supplement, those receptors are blocked and you can't get that nutrient in. And vitamin D runs your hormones. It's part of your immune system. It should be called hormone D and not a vitamin D. So it's running all these things, blood sugar, thyroid function, all of these things that are so important to our basic running or metabolism of our bodies. And when you get that blockade, it turns into a form of vitamin D that makes us feel not good and puts us into a night owl situation. So I've heard you talk about circadian rhythm on your podcast and how important that is. It totally messes up that circadian rhythm because it has the wrong form of vitamin D floating around in your bloodstream now, and it can actually be making you sicker. And same thing, if you go outside, you're getting exposed to that. What the rays of the sun do is it helps also activate our stores and put it into active form, and that can actually create more symptomatology. We become sensitive to the sun's rays or photosensitive when you're exposed to mold. Yeah. The solution out of that, of course, is get out of that. But I've found that if we kind of flood my patients with excessive amount of vitamin D and bump the blockade off of there, it's a miracle. It's like they're all of a sudden saying, oh, I can sleep, which is really counterintuitive that we're giving the daytime vitamin to help them sleep better at night. So if you give the daytime vitamin in the morning, now you have the contrast, and then you have all the hormone things that have to happen through the day to make the right kind of melatonin at nighttime.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you mentioned vitamin D because mine was tanked low, and I'm a stand-up paddler. I'm in the sun all the time. Plus I would supplement, and it was so low. And I was like, what, this is so weird. I must have that gene where I don't make vitamin D. And until I learned I had mold, I was like, oh my gosh, that's why I'm not making vitamin D. It's robbing it from me basically. So so it is like you said, it's really, it's really important to almost over supplement when you're dealing with mold on vitamin D. So, and still try to get in the sun, because like I think one part of your book mentioned that you almost become reclusive where they don't want to go outside. They want to stay in the dark. They want to stay up late. And that's what mold wants you to do. So you have to like counteract all of that.
Yes, you have to keep that, just to know that there's a sly microbe you're dealing with, and keep your fight, stay dedicated to yourself and your health. You're worth it,
That's right.
But it does take conscious, like recognizing, oh, that's right. Have I been outside today? Have I been outside? So I try to have my patients get outside the earliest part of the day as possible to just start all the right, like there's so many hormones that happen because of sun exposure. Absolutely. And so the earlier you can get that, the better.
Yeah. And it's something that I think once you become aware of the fact that you do have this thing within you that's trying to get you to do all these negative things, that first part is awareness. So like reading your book and understanding, oh, I'm doing all these things and my body's telling me not to do them. I better listen and try to do them and try to get past this mold issue. So, and that awareness is so key, because then you're able to go, well, I know I don't feel like going outside, but I got to go outside. I know what I'm fighting now. So, so as far as like a mycotoxin treatment, like when somebody's dealing with the mold spores and the mycotoxin within their body, talk us through what a treatment would start to look like, because your book goes into like some different 5 tools.
Sure. So I ended up, when I sat down to write the book after having this exposure in my house, I realized that I sort of had an order, but didn't realize I had this order consciously. So I thought, oh gosh, I could actually put this into a picture. And I found that an orange was the best way to describe the 5 steps, because so I'll say the 5 steps, and that is avoidance is first, like we talked about, fundamentals, then protect, then repair, and then fight. And so the idea is that the first 2 steps are just setting the stage, avoidance being the most important, and fundamentals is like something if you went to a functional medicine doctor or naturopath, you'd get, diet recommendations, exercise recommendations, sleep, circadian rhythm, all of these things that are so important, and getting the emunctories working. So we can talk about emunctories. And then the 3rd and 4th, protect and repair, has to do with mycotoxin exposure and any kind of immune alterations that just spore exposure has caused. So that's sort of making sure that we are preparing for the known fact that when you start to try to kill fungal species, they start to spit out more mycotoxins to defend themselves. And so we know that when we start doing antifungals, which is the 5th fight, that's antifungals and also anti-other things, because a lot of times once the fungus has messed up your immune system, some bacteria want to hang out and some viruses become chronic, that kind of thing. So plants are wonderful because you can do all of those things with a few different plants. But so we know that if we're going to be adding that, we want to make sure we're not that your body has already handled the load it got from its exposure. So that new load that's going to happen when we start killing off the fungus, you can handle, and it doesn't make you worse. And this is serious business. I mean, I've had patients have major depressive disorders if they went on the antifungals, having, suicidal ideations. I had a patient with Lyme and mold who went into seizure, but from starting antifungals without doing the homework. So it is important. Some people say that, oh, I'll just start on the antifungals. I'll just skip to the end.
Yeah.
And I would say to most people, I wouldn't recommend it. I've seen people get really sick. And if there is an order and it's been time tested and patient tested, and that's why I put it in there. And I'm a little pushy about it. Not that there's only one way to treat mold, but this is a way that can be the most gentle on your body and that you can have incremental success along the way. So those would be my 5 guiding tools.
Yeah, and you mentioned the orange, so it's almost like you're peeling the layers. Yeah.
Yeah. So the idea there is that the first 2 layers really need to be done 100%. Like you wouldn't necessarily eat an orange. That the middle section is the last 3 steps. So that's the protect, repair, and fight. You wouldn't eat an orange by just like we do an apple, like biting into it.
Yeah.
But most of us like to peel the orange part off, and then that white, fluffy part is a little bitter, even though it's chock full of bioflavonoids. A lot of people like to peel that off before you get to the juicy stuff in the middle. And the stuff in the last 3 steps, you pick and choose the tools that are right for you. I put a lot in the book, and I'm hoping that people really are reading the fact that, like, pick the 1 or 2 of the things from that section that match your story, because everybody's mold story is going to look different. You can have a whole family living in a home, and each one of them will display their mold symptoms a little bit differently.
Yeah. Yeah, and you have some great stories in there of different people. So, I mean, you can generally find 1 or 2 that you're like, I really relate to that story more than the other. But yeah, like you said, it's so bio-individual how it affects you. Like when you mentioned fatigue, that was the one thing I didn't have. I almost had like this overt amount of nervous energy. Like I had too much energy, keep me up at night. And then also in the day, I just felt like I'm going to crawl out of my skin. I have to get out of here. Like it was almost like my body was hearing the signal, get out. You are in such a dangerous area. And I read that in your book and I was like, that's what it was telling me to do. And I wasn't listening because I was just like, why do I feel this way when I'm here? But then, like you said, my daughter was a toddler and she only got super sleepy. Like she would just sleep all day at this house we were staying at while we were building another house. And she'd just sleep and sleep and sleep. And as soon as we moved into our house, it was like I had a different kid. And I just thought she was going through like a growth spurt where she had to sleep for 3 months at this house. But it turned like she wouldn't play. She would just want to be held. And she was a toddler. Normally they're running around crazy and stuff. And she would do that when we weren't there. But when we were there, she'd just want to sleep. So and then so the next question that brings me to is some people, when they avoid and they get out of the situation, they remediate themselves immediately. Like they just get better all of a sudden. But then somebody like myself, I stayed worse. In fact, I got worse as we moved into our new house and my body just kept getting worse. And that's how I figured out this is something I got to do. I got to do something about this. I think it's mold and it's not going away. I thought I'd get better once I got out of the environment and I didn't. So you talk about that, like the different personalities of people or genetic profiles that are causing that?
Sure. Yeah, there have been some occupational studies that are very hopeful. And that's what I want people to understand is that, in those cases where they were able to leave the building, they didn't have any personal belongings that came along with them, 50% of people just got better, just getting out of it. That's why I say avoidance, because let's hope you're on that side of that coin flip.
Yeah.
If you're not, and you're like us, that has to do with certain things like your nutritional status, your genetic susceptibility, your immune status. So because it is an immune depleter. So if you're coming into this with already some immune load, that's a little harder. Your previous exposure, that's a big deal. And so those kind of susceptibilities set the stage for you on whether you're going to be one of those people on the other side of that coin flip. What they found in those occupational studies is that the difference was the people that were in the building, like they were trying to figure out what determined which side of that coin people were on. Is there something we could find? And they found that once you became symptomatic, that made it harder for you to get better.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that goes back to this theory that I have, and it's just a theory, but it's what I've based the whole treatment protocol on, is that when you're exposed to those mycotoxins, our first interface is our sinuses.
Mm-hmm.
And our sinus flora, the first response is to take in the toxin and deal with it. Send it to the liver. Oh, yuck. Send it to the liver, take care of it. And then over time, if that's a continuous exposure, that flora starts to wonder, wait a minute, what the message in that toxin is, I'm trying to kill you, to the microbes of our flora.
Yeah.
And so the flora says, wait. And so it starts to make its own mycotoxins in defense of itself. And I think that's the moment when we start to get that where you are becoming the sick building.
Yeah.
Because then if that starts to happen, your own flora starts to compete with itself. Plus you've got these other mycotoxins coming in, and now the mold spores can come and move into your body. And there have been these studies, again, where they look at, kind of proving this theory. They look at healthy people and sick people. If we did a scope of the sinuses and we did, swabbing and things, everybody would have fungus in their sinuses. So it's not the mere presence of the fungus. It's that the sick people, their fungus is making mycotoxins. The healthy people, they're not. Okay. So there's some kind of switch that's turned on. Mm-hmm. It's going to be different for everybody how soon that switch gets turned on. But once it's turned on, now your own flora starts to act competitively with itself. And that's how people can get sicker even after leaving the building, because now they are the sick building.
Yeah, that analogy of becoming the sick building or being the mold factory, where now you can be out of the environment, but yet you're now producing mold, and that's just so scary. And so, to that effect, maybe talk about the emunctories, like why it's important to get it out and how to do that.
Yes. So emunctories, a lot of people are not familiar with this word. And so it's so fun for me to introduce the world to this kind of old naturopathic, nature cure kind of stuff. So emunctories are the ways that we get rid of waste in our bodies. So that's going to be exhaling with breath, sweating, it's all the embarrassing stuff nobody wants to talk about, urination, defecation, the pee, the poo, the gas. And for women, it can be menstruation. For men, it can be ejaculation. So if there's, and even earwax, you can test mycotoxins in earwax, which is crazy. Wow. So if there is a fluid or a gas leaving your body or a stool, that is part of your emunctory system. Okay. And the largest emunctory we have is our skin. That's our largest organ of elimination. So that's why I put things like mud baths in the book and lymphatic massage, because if you can unburden your organs of detoxification that are working on them through the other channels, you can unburden that system by treating the skin and pulling out toxins through the skin. Then, it makes it a lot easier on your organs of detoxification.
Yeah, and you mentioned sauna in your book, which I love because there's so many benefits to sauna, and we hear so many people talking about that. And so I love to see that there were things in your book that anybody could just find a way to do. Even if you can't do them all, you can start the healing process and, fabricate some sort of your own sauna in your house, or go to a sauna, or I don't know what you think about red light saunas, how beneficial those are to mold, but I have one of those. Would you like red light therapy for that?
I haven't researched them yet. I haven't at all. I'm really fascinated with them. So I want to understand what's happening biochemically. That's the thing with the sauna, is that we still haven't proven that you're sweating the toxins out through sweat, but what it does do is a radiator effect, to where it's bringing blood out to the surface to cool you. And then after every sauna, I hope everybody's doing this, you cool the body rapidly with a cold shower. Oh, nice. So that you're bringing all the blood back to the organs of detoxification. So it's more like a radiator, you're picking up toxin on the surface. Whereas the mud bath, what you're doing at that is that actually has a drawing effect. So we actually do see that it can pull and pick up anything that's a fat soluble toxin, which mycotoxins are. It'll pull that out through the skin and reduce the body burden, which is so neat.
I know, that is really neat. I still haven't got my peat mud yet, but that's on my list of things to do. So
yeah, it's so fun. I don't know. There's something little kid in me that just loves when it's time to get in the muddy bath.
Yeah, no, for sure. Because sometimes I'll have my daughter just go out and get mud and give me a mud facial, and I call it my earthing facial because it's like you're getting parts
Nice.
of the earth to help you. So she gets to put mud all over
Yes.
my face and stuff.
I love it. I
But
love it.
one thing I didn't do the first time around that I'm doing now because I'm learning more about the nervous system and how it's affected by mold is that I'm getting into, different things that calm down the nervous system and calm down this, what a lot of people are talking about, this cell danger response. Can you talk about the nervous system a little bit and how important it is to heal with affecting and calming down your nervous system?
Yeah, yeah. So this concept that Dr. Navio has brought to everybody's attention is something that we've seen in chronic illness patients. You can get them away from their problem, or you can treat the infection in the case of Lyme disease, and their body is still alarming. And so it's that you get into this loop where, because you've been in a poisonous air situation, it has triggered the run from the lion reaction in the brain, but there's nothing that your eyes can see that is the problem. So you're in this incongruent area where you are feeling like you're not safe, and you truly are. That's a truth. The mycotoxins are harming your body, but you don't visually have anything to identify it. And so you can get into this thought game, which kind of affects the reptilian brain over time, that says there must be something wrong. And so you go into like the mode you went into, which is you just get everything done. Like, maybe if I get everything on the list, and maybe if I don't sleep, I'll get everything on my list done and I'll feel better. So you can get into that hyper wired tired situation, or people just feel defeated. I can't get anything done, nothing's working. But either way, you have this normal, very physiologic, very protective reaction that the body is doing, saying that you are not in a safe environment, with no clue what is causing that. And so over time, that looping gets kind of trapped into the reptilian brain, to where every sensory input from the body is perceived as a threat.
Mm-hmm.
So even an orgasm could be perceived as a threat.
Wow.
So even a massage.
Mm-hmm.
So that will trigger the body to say, okay, send out all the cytokines, send out all the mast cells, send out all of the things to fight threat. And then when they get out to the job to do it, they don't really find anything, So that's that looping part. And what I'll use for that is anything from homeopathy. It's one of my favorites because it's so gentle and effective.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big effective when you pick the right remedy, but it's not a drug, it's not doing any harm to the body. And then I like to use frequency specific microcurrent for calming down that limbic triggering. Also cranial sacral therapy. I mean, there's just beautiful things that you can do, and guided meditations to tell your body, I honor you and thank you for telling me that something was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't understand, and giving yourself the forgiveness for not understanding. How could you know? You didn't see the tiger in front of you.
Yeah, for sure. No,
So I
I
think
love
then
that.
the cognitive brain eventually does have to talk to the reptilian brain continuously, of like, whenever that trigger happens, again, it could be a good thing. Like your child gives you a hug, the reptilian brain says, oh, we're under threat. We just felt skin pressure. And you have to just consciously, the cognitive brain has to say that's an old way of thinking, that it doesn't serve us anymore. And so you can really work your way through it. There's also DNRS, Annie Hopper. Some people have found that very helpful too.
Yeah, and even I've been working with the vagus nerve and stimulating that and then using that to calm my nervous system and stuff, because I am like high alert all the time. So even before the mold, I was like high strung. So it only made it worse. But yet, I think it's such a cool thing that the mold has taught me in its own way to slow down and to calm down, and how powerful calming the nervous system can be, because we live in a world now where I feel like everybody, regardless of mold, could use limbic training and vagus nerve stimulation and parasympathetic calming down, just techniques. And like you said, guided meditations are something so free and anybody can do, and they're so beneficial, but I think they're so underestimated, because everybody's like, it's the food, it's the food, it's the food. It's not the food.
Right.
Now, to that effect, talking about the food, I really resonated with the fact that you're a bile lover when it comes to what food we eat and how the bile is working in the body. So let's talk about that, like how bile is actually
Yeah.
important when it comes to mold treatment.
Yeah, and bile and vagus nerve have
That's
a
right.
nice teamwork thing that they
Yeah.
do. You know, if your vagus nerve is not firing, which is our rest, digest, time. And
Mhm.
the thing I forgot to mention also is breathing. People,
Yeah.
it's free. Again, like you said, just
Yeah.
because it's free doesn't mean it's not powerful. And so, yeah, I
Right.
think just yoga has had this down forever. When I learned how to breathe through yoga, I was like, oh my gosh, I have not been breathing.
I
I didn't
know.
really know how
Yeah.
to breathe. So yeah, when the vagus nerve is working, when you taste food, that taste of bitter, which is not something that Americans tend to like a lot of, but that I think we should be bitter obligate. I think our bodies are bitter obligate. That will stimulate bile to be released, which bile is made to grab some of our fat soluble toxins and reabsorb them back into the body. So we reabsorb about 93%, 93, 95, depending on who you are, percent of our bile gets reabsorbed from the intestines back, taken back to the liver and deliver vitamin A and vitamin K and all of these vitamins that we need that we don't get all year long. And so the body wants to store them or needs to store them. That works great for vitamins, works really bad for toxins. Because then if the bile is bringing back, I call it in the book, the definition of detoxification insanity. The bile brings back the toxin to the liver and the liver says, I just processed that toxin and put it inside of you to go poop out. And the
Mhm.
bile takes it to the intestines, carries it back up to the liver. And, so it's just this cycle. And so one of the things that you hear a lot in mold treatment is binders.
Mhm.
I like to use food binders if possible. And what we're talking about there is that we're trying to bind bile. We're trying to grab that bile that the liver has packaged up all these mycotoxins inside of the bile, sent it to the intestines to be pooped out. Well, the bile will reabsorb it if it doesn't get grabbed. And insoluble fiber is one of our most powerful binders. And I learned that not even from mold studies, but from studies where people had lost their gallbladder and they needed to find a way to kind of mop up bile because they were having bile diarrhea.
Mhm.
They found that steamed kale and insoluble fiber are fantastic binders.
Mhm.
The nice thing about those is they're also nutritive.
Mhm.
So it's this give and take. It's not just taking, it's giving something back to the body.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, you wouldn't think that such a simple little liquid in the body would be so important. So,
Bile is so important. Yeah, I think I'm a bilophile for
that's
sure.
right. Yeah.
And I think it is really underappreciated. And now with coronavirus, having gummed up bile can actually make things worse in your lungs. We've seen that
Absolutely.
bile is a component of surfactant, which surfactant alone protects your lungs from invasion of viruses. That's one of the things that it does. And bile is a component of the retina of our eye. That's why we see eye symptoms with mold toxicity. The bile gets all gummed up and then it can't do its other job. So
Mhm.
yeah, if you look at bile, it's like, wow, how many things does this fluid do?
I know.
It's crazy.
And uh, going back to all these different symptoms and something as simple as bile and trying to figure out like when you're healing as you're going through a protocol and when the symptoms are disappearing, but then the next day they come back, it it really stuck out to me in your book when you had that little chart that says healing is messy, and it's what I call like the roller coaster of healing. Like one day I'm like, oh, I'm getting better, and then the next day my eyes are puffy and I'm like, oh, really, like I thought I was better. And I almost think people should sign a
Yeah.
contract with themselves that says I won't give up on my treatment, because
Mm.
unfortunately mold treatment is a very slow going process. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. Yeah, the healing is messy graph looks like a big gobbledygook.
Yeah, it's
You
just like
want
all
it
this
to
like,
be just
ugh.
like a straight line that's
Mhm.
improvement all the way. And the reality
I
is
don't get
things
that.
just go up and down and backwards and forwards. And
Mhm.
if the trend is, and that's where it's nice to use the questionnaire. That's why I
Mhm.
developed it in practice. Because when people would come back in, they'd say, ugh, do I have to keep doing these nose sprays? Do I have to keep taking this stuff? I'm not getting any better. And I'd say, okay, well, fill out the questionnaire and let's see. And then we're looking at their questionnaire from 6 months ago. And usually I'd saw them, many times between that. But 6 months is kind of when people get a little squirrely about the nose sprays. We'd look at their previous questionnaire, and I'm like, well, how are the migraines going? Oh yeah, I had migraines. If people
Yeah,
won't remember that
they
they had
won't.
migraines, because we hopefully, and I want everybody to have this impatience with sickness and desire for wellness, and forget where you were. I mean, it's okay to do that. There's nothing wrong with that. I think that is a very healthy sign that the person isn't attaching to their old symptoms. But do remember that you had it when you're talking to your doctor, so that we can, say, look at this, things are working. Let's
Yeah,
just stay the course. And
yeah,
when you're dealing with a water soluble toxin, things move a lot faster, but you're dealing with a fat soluble toxin. So we're trying to move that through butter. We're trying to move that through a thicker fluid in the body. And that just takes longer.
yeah. And that kind of segues into the weight gain aspect of it, because mold actually stores in our fat cells. So, like, one thing that had happened to me, so I was only in
Yeah.
the first time around that I got mold, I was only in the environment for 3 months while we were building our house. And within 3 months' time, the back of my legs went from, I had pretty nice legs. And then within 3 months, it was like cottage cheesy, all bumpy, lumpy bumpies. I'd never had that before. It's not a genetic thing in my family. The women in my family don't have that. So I was like, I don't know what to do with this. And I didn't know until later that it was because of the mold. And thankfully, I've reversed a lot of that. So I want to encourage people that when you heal, you can reverse that. But it's horrible because you think,
Mm-hmm.
what am I doing? I didn't change the way I eat. I'm still exercising. I'm eating all the right foods. I'm a nutritionist.
Yeah.
And here my body was turning to mush. And I was like, what is happening to me?
Yes.
Yeah. So talk about
Yes.
like how it
Yeah.
affects
And it's
your
so common to
muscle and your
have.
fat.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, the mycotoxins will impede protein synthesis. So that will affect so many, proteins are a building block of our whole body. So that's
Right.
hair, skin, fingernails, but also skeletal muscle.
Mhm.
And so we'll see people, even if you don't change, which most people do change their body shape when they've
Mhm.
been exposed to mold, but even if your body shape doesn't change, the composition of your
Right.
muscles changes.
Correct.
So we get reduction of that skeletal muscle and that fat burning muscle, and we get increase in adipose tissue and fatty tissue. And we can actually see marbling of the skeletal muscle when you have mold toxicity,
Mhm.
because the body will try to, since it can't make enough protein in time, it'll fill in with a little bit of fat to try to keep the bulk. It's just amazing to me. And
Mhm.
yeah, it does. I'm so glad that you said this does get better when you
Yes.
get out of the mold and you treat it. And
Yeah.
yeah, you can get your body back.
Yeah. And so I think that alone shows people that this is much more prevalent. There's a lot of people you'll hear about now that are saying, I'm eating right, I'm exercises, I'm not getting the results I'm looking for. And I have this where I'm wheezing for some reason, and I'm not sleeping well. I'm getting up 3 times a night to pee. And it's like, that's when you have to start asking yourself, could this be something I need to test for, or I need to find out if I have this? And I think one of the first steps is for them to go on your website and just take your questionnaire that they can take, and or get the book and take that questionnaire. That way they can just see, is this something affecting me? But can you talk about like what else tests they might want to run just to make sure that they're not being affected?
Yeah, the testing still is a little fraught with difficulties.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
One of the things that
unfortunately.
I use is urine mycotoxin testing
Yeah,
for the bulk
that's
of
what I
my
did.
patients.
Yeah.
And the bell curve, if you're the average moldy, as I would say, then that's going to show whether you're being exposed or not. But some methods are a little tricky, and if you have pre-existing health conditions like immune deficiency,
Mm-hmm.
um, like you're a really bad excreter, we might need to look for some other ways to identify that. But for the
Mm-hmm.
most part, I will use a urine mycotoxin test, and I have my patients go on a low mold diet for about 2 or 3 days before then, because the argument with that is, oh, that's not in the building. They're just eating that.
Yeah.
And while we do have some foods that are going to be higher mycotoxin contamination in our diets, it really takes out the weakness of that test if you just avoid those foods
Yeah.
and then take your test. And then we have a little more confidence that what we're seeing on the urine mycotoxin test is actually in your body. And the problem with that, though, is it doesn't tell us, is this a current problem or a past problem? Where now you're the moldy building. And
Yeah.
that's my frustration, is that it does get a little trickier to tell that. If you need to answer that question, sometimes in serum antibody mycotoxin test can tell you that with the IgE. because that will normalize in about 2 weeks. So if you've been exposed, if your IgE is high, we know you've been exposed to mold in the previous 2 weeks. So in a perfect world, I would run a urine mycotoxin using typically the mass spec method, and we would run a serum antibody mycotoxin test, which is different than a serum antibody mold test. That's your mold allergy test. And people can be completely not allergic to mold, but still be mold sick. So some people have contacted me and are like, yeah, I can't have mold though, because my doctor tested me for mold allergy and I don't have it. I'm like, okay, that's an allergic response to the spore, which is completely different than mycotoxin illness. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. It was a definitive. Yeah, the urine test is a lot more definitive because like when I got mine back, it was like if the line could have gone off the paper of like how far my mold was, it was like it was not done. Like it went all the way to the end and I'm like, wow, okay. And it was the ochratoxin was mine. Wow. So, and actually when you read the book, like there's so many, like I said, real life things you can do and easy things. I mean, if you look at mold treatment, it almost looks kind of easy. It's just the bad thing is it takes a long time and you have to go kind of low and slow with it. And so it's just be patient is what I tell people. You have to be really patient. And one last question, I've got just a couple left here as we wrap up, but one question that has always ruminated with me that I haven't really found a definitive answer on is when you're 6 months down the road into treatment or you're 1 year down the road, how do you definitively know that you've killed off the mold spores and maybe you're just now getting rid of leftover mycotoxins? Like what are the telltale signs other than a lot of the symptoms may have reversed themselves or things just look better? But you know, in my case, I had the mold the first time around and I thought I was better. Like a year and a half later, I'm like, I think I'm good. And then I don't know if I got, I started building the mold again within me. Maybe some spores were left over and I started rebuilding, or if I got another exposure. So what would be like a definitive way of saying, hey, I think I'm at my breaking point here. I think I've healed.
Yeah. So first of all, symptoms for sure. We go off that questionnaire. People say, do you ever see a questionnaire with no symptoms? And I say, yeah, I have plenty of patients who their questionnaire was loaded and now, maybe there's a little bit of ear ringing. I would say ear ringing and pelvic pain are the two things that take the longest to get rid of. And where people, I think it's that looping thing. It's almost like a limbic or the cell danger response gets trapped in the pelvic region or trapped in the inner ear. And so that can take a long time for that to go away. But I've had patients that started with a messy, messy questionnaire that when we were done, there was nothing on that. They're symptom free without having to be on any supplements. So that's my goal is I want to have people off their antifungals, and assuming you're doing all the work to detoxify, because you asked a good question, this could just be detoxification mycotoxins. So the way I think of it, and I got this from Brian Carr, who's a building inspector, if fungus is the fire and mycotoxins are the smoke, we want to make sure that all the smoke is gone. Otherwise, there's probably a fire somewhere. Right. Now, that works really well with bodies as long as you are doing detoxification. Because some people that are just doing antifungals and not the detox part, we could be seeing mycotoxins getting built up in their tissues. But using antifungals with things that help you detoxify, my target is that I have a much, much, much improved questionnaire. So the person's symptoms are nearly gone. And we see a urine mycotoxin test 2 zeros, because they do go to 0, off all antifungals for 3 months apart. So we'll test 0 mycotoxin. They say, okay, let's get off all those antifungals, get off all the detox stuff. And 3 months later, let's take another test. And that's a really good way to know that if they did become the sick building, that'll start to raise back up again, and their body will start to make those mycotoxins.
That's good.
It's a rough estimate. Everybody's a little different.
But. Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah.
So when we get to the first 0 mycotoxin, I'm like, celebrate. Okay, now we're going to wean everything and we're going to watch your symptoms. We're going to watch your tests and retest you in 3 months and see if we're done.
Okay, awesome. And going back to the nervous system healing.
Did that help?
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. I mean, I haven't yet taken, I'm about 6 months into this new treatment with a lot of your protocols because I didn't have your book the first time around. And so I feel like I'm afraid to take the test because I'm like, I don't know if I want to know that I'm not better or I am better, but I see so many things heading in the right direction that I know the load is going to be lower. It's just, yeah, I didn't even go that way yet. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to wait for the test for maybe like 2 or 3 more months just to see what else is left over I can do. And with that, like, so like the nervous system, like I said, is one of my focuses. And you had a recent blog newsletter on the difference between people who truly conquer and those who just can't seem to kick it, other than avoidance, of course. And it comes down to 3 key things. Can you speak on what those 3 key things are? Because I think it was a really well written newsletter.
Thank you. Yeah, and that's just culminating. I was out for a walk and I was laughing at my dog and I realized she's part of my medicine. You know, like she was part because she's funny. So the 3 things were a spiritual practice or an energetic practice, whatever that, you know, and I took like thousands of patients, I culminated it down and I was like, what is the difference? You know, I'm trying to always get to the simplest way, most elegant way to treat people. It was a spiritual or energetic practice. They move their body every day and they laugh every day, like a for real laugh, not the adult version of laughter where we can kind of forget when we're adults how to really laugh. You know, it becomes like you're kind of a dork if you laugh, and if you laugh as an adult, and you're only allowed to laugh sarcastically, or you know, this kind of thing. And I just think, no way, you know, then I want to be a dork. Sign me up.
Sure, yeah, me
But
too.
that was kind of the big thing. Yeah, that was when I looked at all my chart notes and started to really think about the patients that soared through their treatment. I was like, you know, it didn't really have to do so much with what we did, what we gave to them. It had to do with a mental game that they approached this like, okay, this really sucks. It's ruining our finances. It's, you know, it's serious business. And I'm a very lighthearted person, but it's because I do those things every day, you know? So yeah, it's serious. You can get through it.
It is, and it's something that it's so cool that you brought it there because we're too serious as a culture, as a people. Like we need to not take our treatment so seriously, even though we do. I mean, you want to do all the steps, but at the same time, I think those of us who have been chronically ill with something, we get so super laser focused on healing that we forget to have fun. Like, you're okay. Like, part of you is still alive right now, even if other parts are dealing with really detrimental things. So it's like focus on the good and focus on even with that roller coaster, that healing is messy, like focus on the small changes you get along the way, because that tells you you're still moving in the right direction. It might be messy, but you're moving in the right direction. So yeah, so I really
Yes,
think
just
people will
one
love
foot.
the book if they grab it.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, if people are dealing with mold, I really tried to. It was such a compliment you gave me in the beginning by saying that it speaks to real people. It uses like real people language, and that was a very big goal for me. I wrote it right after having mold in our own home, and I was so brain fogged, and I thought, no way, I'm not going to write a book that's going to just like throw my weight around about what a smarty pants I was. You know, I wanted to make sure that it was something that when I was sitting there with my brain fog brain that I could handle it. I could take it in.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. So I wanted to invite the listeners to not only get your easy to read book that spells out in layman's terms how to begin healing, but I also encourage them to visit your website because you have a page, the resources, or it might be the clinical resources, or just resources in general, which I'll put a direct link into the show notes below. But I love that page because you can go there and just find real life things that I can go and get or go and do or look for or try to implement little bits at a time, you know, going low and slow. And the resources are all there, everything from like an air filter to like nasal clearing and things like that. So, you know, what nasal sprays to look for and stuff, and you break it all down. So I love that. It's really useful. So, and then they can take that quick
Great.
quiz on your website as well. And then what else do you offer? I know you started a little membership thing, so talk about that.
I did. I'm only one person, and after I wrote my book, I was stunned how big of a problem mold was. I really only thought it was just this little like chronic Lyme world, you know, and maybe the autism world, and it's so much bigger than that. And so I got a lot of people that wanted to come see me, and as a patient,
Mm-hmm.
and I just couldn't do that. I can't take on more patients, and that just broke my heart. So I thought, okay, I've got to figure out a way to do this. There's got to be a sustainable way to help people that want to just be part of this community and find support with other people. Facebook is a little, it can get off the rails. So it is kind of nice to have somebody where you can say, well, I don't know, what does the expert think about this? Or what's my
Mm-hmm.
take on it? And
Right.
so I created a membership where people can come and pick my brain at these Q&As 2 times a month, ask me any question. We have a forum that looks a lot like Facebook, so it interacts the same way, but it's more private. And that's what I've heard from a lot of people is they just didn't like the idea of Facebook that their insurance agent could come and check it out. And, like there's lots of privacy issues. And so it's a nice private member-based community where people are helping out each other. It's so cool to see parents helping parents and people that are going through this, giving each other advice. And then they can kind of brew up these questions, which is really fun for me. And then I can field them a couple times a month.
Yeah.
So there's so many resources there. You get to see me cooking in my kitchen and
Cool.
sharing my recipes and
Yeah.
all kinds of goofy herbal formulas and stuff like that I'm sharing with the members.
Yeah,
So
that's
if
awesome.
you're looking for support and whatever is spewing out of my mouth is resonating with you,
Mm-hmm.
then you're welcome to join our community. And that's on my
Awesome.
community page.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so thoughtful too of like just let you even into my own kitchen to show you what I'm cooking and things like that's
Yeah.
like a genuine person. So I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much
Yeah,
for
it
your
turns out I'm
time
a real
today.
person.
Yeah, right. Thank you for your book and thank you for your time because you've been a gem in my healing and I hope people will watch this and be able to find you to be a gem in theirs as well. So
Oh, wonderful. That just warms my heart. And your stand-up paddle, that ocean time has got to be so valuable. Well, water time is so
yeah.
valuable for Vegas reset. So yeah, I think
Yes.
it's beautiful that you have found that
Thank
healing.
you. Yeah, it's kind of like maybe why I'm addicted to it is because of that vagus stimulation of just I get completely calm when I'm out there. So yeah.
Yeah.
Well, come
Plus
join
it's
me
water.
sometime.
Yeah, that sounds great. Great.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Krista, and hopefully we can do this again too, maybe down the line, so I can share with you. Hey, I think I'm all better. So,
Yay, I want to hear that. Yeah,
okay,
definitely. All
awesome.
right. Thanks again for the invitation.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you so much. Bye for now.
Is your gut right? Are your hormones in check? Well, ATP Science is my new go-to brand when it comes to lowering estrogen and getting your gut right. In fact, their product, Gut Right, is on the top of my list with regard to an all-around supplement that I would recommend to almost any client I work with. It's so imperative that we get our guts right in order to absorb all the nutrients from our foods that we're taking in. Our guts are under so much stress from our food system, from the stress of the system we live in as a whole, to dangerous radiation we're bombarded with. When you hold your cell phone right in front of your stomach, you're actually radiating your internal organs and kind of breaking down the gut lining, so to speak. So alongside with that, social pressures from social media. Yeah, guys, Facebook and Instagram totally affect your gut because it affects you on an anxiety and nervous level of, you're seeing all the pressures of what your peers are doing and can you live up to that? So it puts pressure on you. So you might want to consider getting your gut right by doing a 10-day protocol of the Gut Right. So simply order yours today. Use the link in the description as well as my code JODELLE, JODELLE, which gives you 10% off. And take Gut Right for 3 times a day for 10 days. Then begin balancing your hormones with my favorite product, Alpha Prime. And can I just say that I've had several clients that have lowered their estrogen by half within almost 6 weeks' time. They've lowered their estrogen from astronomical numbers in half by just taking the Alpha Prime. So this is a Jodelle approved product that everybody that's dealing with hormonal imbalances or excess estrogen should be on. So order yours today, start moving the needle in the right direction and feel better faster. Dry skin, hair falling out, sleep issues, low energy, constipation, digestive issues, even trouble swallowing, and feeling like your neck has a lot of tension. These can indicate a thyroid issue, and now more than ever, I'm seeing subclinical thyroid issues in virtually every client I work with. So what's one easy way to amp up your thyroid and improve your health overall? Natural desiccated thyroid. And no, you don't have to go to your physician to get that. You can actually get natural desiccated thyroid from Ancestral Supplements. It's a company that I love and work with. I love their beef thyroid, beef liver supplement. Did you know that you can only make the T4 to T3 conversion into that active thyroid hormone if the liver's in check? So get your thyroid and your liver in check with Ancestral Supplements beef thyroid. Click the link in the description and use my code JODEL to save 10% on a great thyroid support that your body will love and it will thank you for in the way of getting rid of all of those symptoms I mentioned at the beginning of this.